HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR leaders. Today's guest is Nigel Miller, and Nigel is the Chief HR Officer at Edelman. Nigel, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. It's great to be on your show. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Tell HR leaders a little bit more about yourself and your journey to becoming the Chief HR Officer at Edelman.
Well, so I'm a Canadian living in London. I've been in the UK for almost 10 years, in Europe for the better part of 15. My path to becoming the head of HR for Edelman is a little bit unique in that it's a career that's sort of come full circle. I started in communications. Actually, I was lucky enough to live next door as a child and as a teenager to the head of public relations for the Toronto Maple Leafs in Canada. You probably know about them.
Definitely.
And so I was working in PR and doing media relations at a very young age, and then started working for some competitive firms to Edelman for almost a decade in North America, just building a career in communications. But it always had an HR component to it, whether it be employee engagement, change management, learning and development, recruitment. All of those elements were passions for me and things that I volunteered to get involved with and started to learn and develop, to the point where the company that's now known as Anheuser-Busch InBev asked me to come over to Belgium and lead from a culture and change perspective as that organization was going through a massive merger. And that's when I really made the transition to HR. It went on, and I worked in the soft drink business for a number of years. Edelman was actually my agency, so I was a client of Edelman for as many as 5 years. No, I worked at Anheuser-Busch for a number of years, and it was then that Anheuser-Busch InBev, and it was during those years when the company had become InBev, so the merger of Interbrew and Ambev, the Belgian and Brazilian brewers coming together. That's when I started to make that transition to HR, and I actually hired Edelman to help in the launch of this new company, particularly to employees around the world. And I became a big fan over time of Edelman, and ultimately I decided to join the firm. And that's why I say I kind of came full circle from communications to HR, and now leading an HR function in the world's leading communications company.
So how was that transition then, going from one area of the business to HR?
Well, it was more natural than you might imagine. Communications has been and building a core competency in communications has been a real help to me in terms of labor relations, for example, negotiations, difficult conversations, but also conversations where we seize opportunity to engage employees, to build culture and change initiatives, to manage through change. And change just seems to be the ongoing theme for leaders in business today, but specifically HR leaders as well. So communications has been a great help to me as I've navigated with my various employers through change.
So I suppose it's given you quite a unique perspective then with that transition. What skills do you feel that you've taken over from that role into HR that's helped?
Well, again, as I said, it's having a background in communication has really been a big help in for example, when I was in the soft drink business, in labor relations, in distilling down pretty complex topics for your social partners, distilling them down to more digestible, easily understood concepts, and then obviously negotiating through difficult transitions, seizing opportunities to manage through change in my various organizations, communicating effectively internally, and bringing employees along on the journey. And understanding what good communication looks like. Good, authentic, real, often hard-hitting, but also simple communication. Understanding what that looks like is critically important. And then over time, obviously, as I've been in HR for quite a long time, I've been fortunate enough to go through a lot of change. and also be given the opportunity to lead and bring in people who had much more experience and expertise than I had in specialist areas of HR. For example, rewards or compensation, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And where we are now in your role, what really occupies your mind on a day-to-day basis now?
It's probably not untrue for most HR leaders, but what really occupies my mind, among other things, is how do we as a function ensure that we are always relevant to the business in terms of driving business goals, bringing analysis and fact base to decisions that need to be made, making strong recommendations based on those facts, helping people succeed, and in a way, almost getting out of the way. Finding ways to enable leaders to succeed, for businesses to thrive, whether that be through, simpler performance management, simpler assessments of top talent, programs for leaders to improve their development, those types of things. It's almost like, to use the sporting analogy that we talked about earlier, it's almost like being a very effective referee sometimes, and calling a good game, if you will. Sometimes, our function is not noticed, but it's so critically important because we're side by side with leadership to make things happen. Those are the things that often occupy my mind during the day, just ensuring that the programs and recommendations that we're making drive the business forward.
Can you share one of those projects or transformations that you've been through that you're most proud of?
Everywhere I've worked, maybe I've been fortunate, but organizations have been going through massive change, and I've just been, a part of it, as opposed to necessarily leading it. But Anheuser-Busch InBev years ago was formed out of a company that calls itself the world's local brewer. So a very decentralized organization that became renowned for its overarching culture, the speed around which it could drive integration of acquired companies. And I learned a ton from just having been there through all of that time. But I'm also proud of the way that our function was able to assist and be core to the success of those integrations, whether it be the acquisition of Anheuser-Busch as an example, and establishing a culture in the organization that everyone really clearly understood. And it was a culture that people could understand whether it was right for them. We were very honest about what it would be like to work there. And I sort of brought that with me wherever else I've worked, is trying to make sure that the employee value proposition, the culture, is clear for everybody. Because no organization is for everybody, and being honest about that and say, hey, this is what it's like to work here. This is what we're trying to do. These are the types of people that we think will thrive here, and it's a deal, if you will, with employees, and helping them understand that so that they can in fact thrive, or at times decide this isn't for me. That's really important.
Mm-hmm. And how did you communicate that message to employees when you went through that transformation and acquisition? What were some of the things that you guys did?
In each case, again, this sounds really simple, perhaps, but being clear, for example, about what the organization's values are, and making sure they're not generic, making sure that they are role modeled by leaders so that people can see the words that are the values, and then see those demonstrated in the actions of leaders. And so that the things that are recognized and rewarded in the organization really reinforce those values. So that, people, wherever they are working in the organization, understand, okay, I get what this company's trying to do. I'm inspired by it. I understand what my role is in helping us to achieve that. And I understand what the framework is. I understand, the framework within which I can play. And being really clear about that. And again, making sure that leaders in the organization role model those values. That's absolutely true here at Edelman. We only have 3 values. And I think people, wherever they are in the organization, would say, I not only do I understand those values, but I see our leaders across the company role modeling those values.
Can I ask what those values are?
Well, the first one's about excellence. Is you would expect us to say that, but the first one's about having a relentless pursuit of excellence, ultimately with a client focus. So that's all about quality and ensuring that we don't cut any corners, et cetera, when it comes to the work that we do for our clients. The second one's really around curiosity. Our company remains independent, so it's what we call the freedom to be constantly curious. And I may conclude at some point with an initiative we did this year, among many, to inspire our employees to go out and be curious, to get outside, to spend time in their communities, with their friends, et cetera, always looking for new ideas to be curious. And then the third one is the courage to do the right thing. There's a lot of businesses and potential client work that we don't do because it doesn't fit with our ethics as an organization. And at the same time, we encourage our employees not to be afraid to say, hey, there's a better way to go. There's a better path to take, and just to stand up for what they believe is right. So those are really important values for us. And I hope that employees look around and they see leaders across the organization really exemplifying those three values.
What impact do you feel, or can you give an example, what impact do you feel that those values have had on the businesses that you've worked within?
Well, and I said it before, they create a framework around which decisions can be made. We translated those values into behavioral competencies in our assessments, so that every employee in the organization can measure themselves, and their line managers can give them input as to how they're doing in living those values. They shape, for example, the kind of work we do and the kind of clients that we do our work for. There's a lot of industries we don't play in. We're very proud of the work we do for our clients, and we're proud of our clients and the difference that they make in their communities, in their industries, et cetera. And we'd like to think that we play a role in that. Great.
So where do you see the biggest opportunity for improvement now within the HR function?
Well, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence.
Sure, the buzzword right now.
Yeah, it really is. So you'd expect any conversation to sort of tip into that at some point in time. I think for HR, we can play, as professionals in our function, we can play a really critically important role in helping our leaders understand what impact artificial intelligence might have on ways of working going forward, on the work that our employees will do, what impact technology will have, where it can create efficiencies, and where it may create some challenges for us. We need to have that level of insight, of business acumen, so that our leaders can look to us and expect us to see around corners a little bit, to see ahead, to be more analytical, to use insights more effectively. And we have an explosion of tools nowadays from HR systems to enable us to get that kind of insight, get those kinds of analytics for things like workforce planning, and for understanding, maybe a year, 2, 3, 5 years down the road a little bit, so that our organizations can predict going forward. But that requires, far more than a transactional approach to HR.
Yes.
That requires people coming out of different parts of business. It may require people having different degrees coming out of university. I don't know, but for us to really make a difference as we go forward, those are some of the things I think HR folks will have to have.
So how are you currently preparing internally in the HR department? How are you? Of course, there's a huge wider impact on the business. How are you currently harnessing HR technology within your team?
Well, we've got a number of things we're working on. Building out the business case for investment in future technology. But some of the things that we've benefited from, I look at recruitment. We use Taleo, and Taleo gives us across the business a far greater insight into candidate tracking. It gives leaders, not just leaders, all employees, the opportunity to get involved in recommending potential candidates because they can see. So it's what we call social sourcing, where all employees can be involved. There's a gamification sort of approach to that. We can be very, planful in the way that we're managing recruitment as a result of Leo. We were from a collaboration perspective, we were one of the very first partners with Facebook. We're almost a beta, if you will, for them to use Workplace, which is
really?
there are a whole host of collaboration tools that organizations have been trying to use to improve communication, to reduce email traffic, etc. We have found that Workplace, partly because almost everyone's on Facebook already, Workplace is intuitive. The search function in Workplace is second to none. So anything that's in there, you can search very quickly and find people, ideas, files, etc., very, very quickly and very intuitively. And just things like live video conferencing, the technology is really robust for sharing. And I think we're actually still at the relatively early stage of using it in its most effective way, but we're pretty good at that. And then from a learning and development perspective, we are using Docebo, which is again, there's many LMS solutions that organizations can tap into.
Yeah.
We like this one in part because maybe like others, but I think it does it better. It provides, again, really intuitive, real-time, real tailored learning solutions. But we as leaders of the function, we can track learning very quickly. People who are involving themselves in, training on the go, if you will, there is a gamification approach there. They like that. They get points if they participate. They can compete a little bit. But again, they can have really tailored learning development solutions when they want them. And so technology has really changed, all of those things so much, and we'll continue to hopefully explore new ways of taking it back.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that as well. It's great to give our members some insight into the different systems you're using, because one of the big challenges, as you know, is that there's so much out there. There's so many different solutions, and everyone says they're the best one. So yeah. It's very hard to do that. And it's also one question I had for you: how are you managing those systems communicating with each other? Have you got to that stage yet where you have those systems communicating together effectively?
We're one of many companies that's also exploring all-encompassing HR systems. You've got Workday out there, you've got SAP and Oracle systems, and we're in the exploration stage because we have an older Oracle setup right now, and we need to evolve. It's within that I'm pretty sure all of these tools can be integrated. Right now, they don't talk to each other as effectively as I'd like, to be perfectly honest. And so people have to kind of tap into, on their desktop, if you will, they have to go to a different for each one of these things. And I talked about collaboration, recruitment, learning and development. There are others, of course. Things like, for us in our business, we do timesheets. You want to make that as easy as possible. And we now have a system where people can just do it on their phone very quickly, as opposed to having to have their laptop. And how much people are using their phone. They can actually download their timesheet or update their timesheet in seconds now. It's all of those things that are coming. Mobile technology is amazing, but getting them to talk to each other and making them seamless. Again, HR systems are looking to make that possible, and we're trying to explore which one is best for us.
I think we've seen this happen in quite a few different functions. I think firstly with marketing went through that transition, sales has gone through that transition, and then now I think you see HR going through that transition of the digital transition that they've had. And you're not the only one in that position. I think everyone I speak to is in a similar position of trying to get those systems to talk together, because that's really when things get really interesting from a speed perspective. And I think what's great is, as you know, most of these softwares, they have the API that can integrate with all of the other systems as well. But of course, when you think about some of the larger systems that you mentioned, it's such a huge investment for the business that you have to get it right. As well. So
yeah, and we actually work with some of our clients to help them manage the cultural change journey required to onboard a new system in many cases. So you take a Workday, for example, and the role that change management has to play to ensure that leaders can take full advantage of a dashboard at their fingertips. But if they still think of, for example, of HR in the traditional way, where I'm going to walk down the hall and my HR person is going to do all of that for me, that would require a change, wouldn't it? And some organizations are still working that way. And if they're going to invest in a Workday as one example, or an SAP or Oracle system, they need to also invest in the time and resource to go through the change journey. So interesting for us, we're doing that with clients, and we're going to have to do it for ourselves as well.
When you go through a lot of these changes or embedding a new software, I think that's the easy part. It's the actual adoption of the teams and the managers of using it. That's the hard part. And I think, as you said, companies don't give enough attention to that part. And the
some don't.
Yeah, the shift in mentality. If you have someone who's been using the same system for over 10 years, then expecting them to change overnight to a new system with a dashboard, with analytics, etc. is honestly, most of the focus should be in the actual development of those individuals and the training, because it's going to take a lot longer than you feel.
No, you're absolutely right.
The strategies, I always say the strategies seems to be the easy part. It's the execution where most people fail. So
that's right.
Thank you for your insight on that and sharing the detail of that. That's going to be really helpful for our members. We already spoke about HR skills and what's going to be important in the future, and obviously how you're preparing for that. That's great. So I suppose that leads us quite nicely onto what we call the quickfire round, where I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you have no more than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Is that okay?
I will try. I will try.
What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a leader in the field of HR?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure I've ever thought of it that way, but if I was held back at any point, I think it was in part because of that journey that I described to you earlier. For a very senior role in HR or the lead of the function, I didn't have as many years of technical HR experience than some folks might. I had all those years in communications leadership experience, leading a public affairs or communications function and growing up that way. So if I was held back, I was absolutely fine with that, because I wanted to make sure that all of those experiences were relevant to working in HR. And I've had the wonderful opportunity of meeting with and working with amazing specialists in all aspects of HR, from recruitment to learning and development to OD and rewards that have helped me. And I'll always want to be surrounded by those great people as well. What's
the best piece of business advice that you've ever received?
Wow, there's so many. We all get a lot of advice. I'm just going to say the first thing on my mind, which was, it was actually an HR leader many years ago, and I've never forgotten this. He said to me afterwards, "Nigel, my advice to you would be never hesitate to ask the dumb question, because it's not usually a dumb question, particularly if you truly try to understand the answer, because that answer, that information that you get, probably helps everyone else around the table if you're in a forum. Often, and he was right, and often he would ask the question that we all wanted to ask. And so it's a simple concept, but having the curiosity, the interest, and the desire to understand the answer to questions, really, really important.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And what's one book that you would recommend to our audience, and why?
So when I get asked this, my answer is often different. But I'm going to say this time, because I think it's so relevant. I read it again recently. It's called The Power of Full Engagement. by Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz. It was probably written 15 or 20 years ago, and I picked it up again recently. I think it's more relevant today than it was then, because people will always tell you that they are so busy. All of the technological tools, the social media, the day-to-day, the hour by hour, almost minute by minute busyness. This book is about, and it was about, continues to be about managing one's energy versus one's time, and the impact that can have on actually achieving results. I'm not sure it didn't kind of prompt some of the push today for things like meditation and unplugging. All of those things that actually inspire us to be more creative and more effective at times. So that's my recommendation today, The Power of Full Engagement.
Fantastic. I'll definitely link that in the description. You mentioned meditation briefly there. Do you meditate yourself?
Not if you can call long distance running completely unplugged long distance running meditation, then yes. I'm not sure that it's the same thing, but it is what I do. I like to run long distance with no phone, no music, just out into the countryside, and I find that's extraordinarily refreshing for me.
I definitely think that's a form of medication. I think that's a great form of meditation. Mine's similar with the gym. I forget about everything outside of that. And then for that 1 hour, I'm completely unplugged from everything around me. I think it comes in different forms. I'm also started using an app called Headspace. I'm not sure if you've heard
outstanding.
Of it. So I do that. There's different modules in there. Probably the best thing I've ever purchased in the App Store.
Yes.
And before bed, sometimes I'll put it in, and it just kind of if anyone's hasn't, I'll link in the description, but it's great.
I have used that too. The one thing I would say about Headspace is if you were to summarize one of the core insights from Headspace, it's about breathing. And if I go back to my own background in communications and media training and presentation training, one of the core recommendations made in all of those exercises is about breathing. And breathing, it has such a huge influence on your ability to think, your ability to relax, your ability to communicate, and I could keep going. And Headspace does talk a lot about breathing.
Yeah, fantastic. Could you share one internet resource that you use to increase productivity or stay in tune with current events?
You'd expect me to say this perhaps, but my choice here would probably be still LinkedIn. It's been around a very long time. It's an incredible resource for HR people. Mm-hmm. It gives me, and I think most of my colleagues, an insight into almost everybody in business. If they use it effectively. So it's great for network, it's great for relevant industry news, and it continues to build on its strengths. The only other thing I would say is, so LinkedIn would be my choice, but not far behind from the standpoint of just staying in touch with business and relevant trends, etc. I use Twitter as a sort of a news aggregator, and I really enjoy Flipboard.
Great. And just out of curiosity, on LinkedIn, do you use that? Do you still use that for recruitment, or do you use that for recruitment purposes or not?
Our recruiters definitely do. Yes.
Yeah. Have they found that to be quite effective?
Yes.
Great, fantastic. And what's Flipboard? Sorry, I don't know about Flipboard.
So Flipboard is an outstanding tool where there's a caution here because many of us fall into the trap of getting our news a little bit in a vacuum, and so we follow the same things and get the same input. So it's important for us to sometimes go outside of the bubble and understand different perspectives. Flipboard, on the other hand, is you can build your own daily magazine. So you describe what your interests are, and it downloads news for you in that space. So if you like sports, if you like nature, in my case, it's a lot of it around culture and change management, every day it extracts news from around the world and puts it into a package, a magazine package for you. So I get that in one place. It's incredible.
Great. Definitely. So it's just on the App Store?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Oh,
okay. I'll definitely link that in the description. What's one thing about your business that most excites you today?
Well, you'd expect me to say our people. I think we have our industry's best people. Maybe it's because of our independence, because of our history, because of our clients, etc. We just have absolutely remarkable people. But the other thing that's very exciting for me is we're 18, 19 years into a Trust Barometer research. And in the last year alone, it has helped to predict and guide clients in terms of the attitudes of publics towards major institutions. It really predicted what happened in the U.S. with respect to the last election. It could have predicted Brexit because it was very early on in describing the decline, the massive decline in trust in institutions that's taken place over the last few years. And it's been a great fact-based tool to help clients to ensure that they're doing the right things to build trust in their employees and their stakeholders, et cetera. So it's been, for me, it's very exciting, and it just builds on its strengths every year. That's our Trust Barometer.
So could you give a bit of more information about what that is, the Trust Barometer?
So
is it a technology? Sorry.
Yeah, the Edelman Trust Barometer is an annual survey of it surveys people from around the world, and we talk about the regular general public and the elites, if you will, those who are highly educated, and there's been a big divide between the two. But that research comes out every year in January. It has for 18 years now, and it has breaks by sectors and practices. It has breaks by geography, etc. And it's been incredibly useful as an insight into trusted institutions over a long period of time.
Well, look, you've been a great guest, and really appreciate you joining us. And I know our members will be a lot better off for it. So thank you very much for that. Give our listeners one parting piece of guidance, and also the best way to get in contact with you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure for me as well, Chris. The conversation has been a lot of fun. One piece of guidance, that's so hard, but I'm just going to say something that I've tried to push for the last little while, and the inspiration came from our client Unilever. Where they kind of ran a campaign called Get Outside. And we took that and ran with it within our own context. And we had a program for employees around the world encouraging them to get outside. And again, the idea here is we are so obsessed with busyness and the day-to-day that sometimes we just don't take the time to step away and reflect. We talked about running earlier, but getting out, the idea of getting outside is to step out of your office or whatever you're doing and go do something different. Go for a walk in the woods, go for a walk up the street, take your team for a walking meeting, whatever it may be, do something different because that inspires curiosity. It gives time for reflection. It re-energizes you. And that's my piece of advice is get outside.
I think that's an amazing piece of advice, because for me, if I didn't go to the gym or do the sports that I did, I don't think I could I don't think I'd be as effective as I am. It's my time to recharge.
Yeah.
And just stop thinking
about your brain needs a break sometimes.
Yeah. Even for me, may sound quite silly, and my wife always still gives me a lot of a hard time for it. But even computer games, and that sounds quite silly, for me is an escape from the stresses and everything else. It allows me to sort of recharge. So that and sports are the two ways that I do that. Even in my previous company, one of the things we used to do, which I didn't even look at it as that perspective right now, was if we had a stressful day, I would take the team, we would just walk around the block.
Yeah, that's the idea. Is exactly that. I'm just looking up something here. It's exactly that. Is just to take the team around the block. Go see some. Our offices are right up the road from Westminster Abbey and the Houses of Parliament, and And I asked folks in a town hall recently how many had been inside Westminster Abbey or on a tour of the Houses of Parliament, or walked by and actually just stood in front of and admired Buckingham Palace. And as you would expect, for many, the answer was, actually, I haven't done that.
Really?
But how inspirational can any of those things be? You know, we're all blessed to be near something that is really interesting. It might even be a tree or a flower, who knows? But all these things can be inspiring if we take time to look.
I think I think it's got harder now in the world that we live in, where you're constantly distracted. As you said, everyone's living on their phone, they're living on social media, living online. Like, you know, it only takes you going on a train to look at around you to see every single person looking at a screen. Yeah. And then as soon as they come outside of that screen, they're at work.
Yes.
So that's true. There's never an escape. Even I find myself sometimes I'll be doing work and I'll get distracted by something on my phone, and you know, then 1 hour's gone by and I haven't achieved what I wanted to do. But when I was younger, when social media, you know, didn't exist as much, or it wasn't as high, I was always out doing things, going to the park, I was just constantly doing things. I never spent time at a desk or in my house, because there's always something to do. Now you're almost trapped by the fact there's always something on TV, there's always something on Netflix, there's always something on Amazon you can watch. There's just too much going on around you. So,
well, you know, Chris, this get outside concept was actually inspired by research that we did that found prison inmates, and these were prison inmates in the United States, had more time outside, were blessed with more time outside than children of today. And that's something to think about. You know, just unfettered time, not organized time, but unfettered just play time, I think, is sometimes what kids miss. And I've got 2 kids, and I'd love to think that they have time just to be bored, just to go out and play and to be creative and conjure up a game on their own, as opposed to having it all be very organized. So that's where the insight came from. But it's quite a thought.
I think it's an area we could talk about for a very long time, and I see it with my nephew. I babysit him every other Sunday. He comes over and I babysit him, and I say babysit him, he's 7 years old. I don't know if you still count that babysitting, but he comes over and he literally, if I didn't make him or suggest we go anywhere, he would sit there in front of an iPad watching YouTube videos, gaming, whatever it may be, for the whole day, and he'll be very content and happy to do that. And looking at it's so shocking to me. Even I don't know if I should get into this topic. It might be a bit controversial, but even when I see a parent, I've actually had discussion with my sister about this, of when a child cries and they just give them an iPad to keep them quiet, or give them the phone to watch a video.
Well, you know what, Chris, I guess the concept, there's a time and a place for everything, and technology has enhanced our lives in so many ways. It's just a question of finding that right balance, and finding those opportunities where we are completely unplugged, and as a result, we're having to create our own entertainment, whatever that may be.
Yeah, I think that you hit the word when you say create. That's the key thing, right? For me, it subdues your creativity, because you're already getting the content and you're consuming, and it's coming at you from every angle, that you almost don't have to think. It's like reading social media in a lot of ways just stops people from having to think about that subject in any more detail, because they've got a video telling them this is exactly what it means. And it's that, and as you said, it's that one person's perspective, but we're all looking at that same perspective, unfortunately, across different social channels. So you have to look outside. So I'll definitely be looking at an app that you just had. And the creativity side of it, I think, is a dangerous place. It stops people from being innovative, thought-provoking, coming up with original ideas, if you're always just looking at social or looking at what other people are doing. For me, some of the simplest things, I got married 2 weeks ago.
And, congratulations.
Thank you very much. And one of the most joyful things I ever did was that I sat at a table in my living room 2 days ago, and I got every single card that I received, wedding card, and I spent literally about 7 hours cutting up cards and creating a huge sort of montage of all of the cards, and it's something as simple as that my friend think you're crazy, and the suggestions were from my friends, why don't you just pay someone to do that? Why don't you go online to one of those websites where they can build something like that for you and send it over? And I was like, why? Because it's easier, it saves you time.
And how much fun was that? I'm sure that was really fun.
I say it was fun, apart from the 2 hours I spent getting glitter off of everything in the house. So
yeah, that was probably a challenge, I'm sure.
It was, yeah. But we got a bit carried away there. But I really appreciate your insights, and that's why I want to have these conversations. It's always fun.
Yeah.
What would be the best way if our members ever want to reach out to you? What is the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, of course, and my Twitter is at Nigel Miller 64. So those would be a couple of good ways.
Great. Well, look, thank you for sharing your journey with us, and I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thank you, Chris. Good luck with everything.